Hey everyone, welcome to LGBTr. That stands for lots of good books to read. And if you've watched any of my my previous show, I explained why I had to change that over because there's another podcast out there that's pretty popular called The Read, which was what my previous title was. So I had to change that over, and now we've got something that's maybe a little bit cooler. Who knows? But tonight I have a great guest that I am very excited to have on the show. We met on Twitter a while ago, and yeah, he's been giving us some pretty amazing tweets and content since then, which we're going to definitely get into. So let me do a quick introduction. Tonight's guest is an upcoming author hailing from the suburbs of Atlanta, Georgia. He describes himself as a bad student, carefree, and a powerful gay. Powerful may be right because he's set to release his first book, Jake in the Box, through Penguin's Putnam imprint in the spring of 2020. We're going to talk about his book, but before we get there, I want you all to get to know the author behind the work. Everyone, here is Ryan Douglas. Hey, Ryan, what's going on?
Hi, how are you?
Good. I'm excited to have you here. So, what was your feeling about kind of getting on the show in the first place?
I'm excited. I love the community building that you're doing. I love that you're giving a platform to uh, queer Black people. I think that's really important. So I'm just excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to have you, and let's just jump into some of these questions. So, in the intro, I have you describe. You said you described yourself as a bad student. So, could you explain that? Why do you describe yourself as that?
Well, I came up with that very recently, actually, because I was now that I'm like going to be published, I've been thinking about like what I want to put in my bio and how I want to describe myself in a way that's like quick but accurate. And the reason I say I'm a bad student is because I've never really done academia very well. I've always been kind of an internal sort of person, and I sort of I have this imagination that sort of prevents me from engaging in school and engaging in like the curriculum. But that's the same thing that helps me as a writer. So I feel like it's something that I think about, just the way that we measure sort of intelligence and capability through academia, and I think about the the things that I'm capable at, like creative writing. I feel like certain qualities that make me good at that also make me really bad in school. So I've always been kind of, well, not always, but at a certain point, I became like kind of an average, kind of a C student. And it's one of those things that's like frowned upon, but I feel like everybody learns in different ways. And I think that the curriculum that we go through is pretty rigid. So that's why I say I'm a bad student, and I'm proud of it.
That's cool. That's cool. I mean, because it's funny because not everybody is like a school person. I don't know if that makes sense, but
Yeah.
I know that there are a lot of people that it just doesn't really mesh well with the way that they think necessarily, and maybe some different approaches would help. But did you take in like any creative writing classes while you were in school?
Yeah, and I was always like performing like above and beyond in those classes because that's what I wanted to do and that's what I cared about. But in other classes, like I never. It was always hard for me to like pretend to care about learning about things that I didn't care about, and instead of like pushing myself, I just kind of refused to do it, which I would not recommend that, obviously, but it's just I just couldn't. It's always been very hard for me to sort of like force myself. But creative writing, yeah, I took creative writing from like eighth grade. Um, I was always looking for it, whether it was in extracurriculars or in like actual classes. So I took it. I also minored in creative writing in college, so I've taken quite a few classes.
Okay, awesome, awesome. Again, I always loved the creative writing classes that I took, and they were always my favorites as well. I mean, I can remember um, kind of switching from. I think when I was in college, I switched over from computer science to English because I mean, and they're like two different worlds. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so I definitely had that same love for that area. Now, was writing something you'd always envisioned yourself doing? You hear me, Ryan?
Sorry, you're silent. Wait, okay.
Did I?
It was frozen for a second, and I couldn't hear you. Okay,
Okay. A
and
little
now you're
hiccup there.
back.
Okay. So was writing something you would always envision yourself doing?
It's always something that I've done. I just it kind of came very naturally to me. Like when I was really young, I used to love picture books, and I had like this huge collection. And at a certain point, I guess like I had to be like 4 or 5. I would like cut out the pages with construction paper, and then like draw the pictures and draw the stories, and it just kind of like progressed. Like in middle school, I started writing like, or not middle school, but like elementary school, I started doing like chapter books and writing about like spies, like kid spies. And then I wrote a fantasy novel when I was 12. That was my first novel, and it's kind of just like gone. I started writing YA when I was a teenager, and it's kind of just like built up in that way. Like it's just always something I've done.
Okay. Now, why YA though? Because I know I guess a lot of authors have their different reasons for kind of settling on a specific genre. Even though I guess YA can kind of spread itself across other genres, but why specifically that age group?
I love the amount of growth that happens in people in that stage. I love how, I don't, for lack of a better word, how crazy the psyche is in that stage, and just like I like looking at characters of that age because it's kind of reasonable when you're dealing with like teen characters that they grow and change a lot within like a semester or within a year, because those are like formative years. And I think that we grow all throughout our lives, but uh, just like for the sake of a narrative and like showing that growth, I think that teenhood is a time where you can do a lot with characters. And I also just, it's also like I'm still at a stage in my life where YA is kind of the like the themes or like the experiences that are in YA are things that I feel most comfortable speaking to, because I don't really consider myself like a full adult yet. I'm still in that weird stage where I'm like, in between. I just graduated college, and I'm like getting into like adulthood. So I just feel like that's what's behind me, and that's kind of what I can speak to now. So I might write adult later. I don't know, but for now it's YA.
Gotcha. All right. So now I couldn't find this in my research, but I could have sworn there was a recent tweet or something where you said that you had recently come out to someone close. Now, is my memory serving me correctly there?
I think so, because yeah, I don't remember that. I don't think I came out to anyone. I haven't really come out to anyone in a while.
Okay. So what is you since we're on the subject, what's your coming out story?
Um,
Or do you have
I came out. Well, I first came out as bisexual when I was like 19, because I actually thought that I was bisexual. Like, they say that like people use that or whatever. People use that as like a transition phase, but I legitimately thought that I was, because I had experiences with girls that I enjoyed. I just I think I was a little bit confused. So because I hadn't had enough experiences with guys, you know. Um, but yeah, I told like right. I waited until I went to college to tell my families that I wouldn't have to like face them. But I told my mom and my dad um, and my brother, and then I came out on Facebook when I was like 21, I think, and like then everybody did.
Mm.
Uh, family was like talking about it, but they weren't talking to me because my family is very like, okay, it's okay as long as you don't mention it. You know, it's okay as long as we don't bring it up ever. So they all know, but it's something that just kind of gets ignored.
Okay. All right. So now let me move into our Twitter conversation because we're going to come back to the sexuality as far as your character is concerned in the book. But let me move into this part of the conversation. Now you seem to have a pretty good grasp on Twitter. So and you have a few viral tweets floating out there, and you have seem to have consistent engagement, at least from what I can see. So, what can you teach some of us, authors and otherwise, about what to do to increase our following and engagement on Twitter? It seems to be a hard nut to crack.
It is. It was hard for me to crack for a long time, and don't I don't have like one answer. I think there are multiple things that happened with me that built my platform. First of all, I think it's really important to engage with whatever community that you want to be a part of. Uh, just like communicate with people. Don't be afraid to jump into conversations because the like those connections that you make are going to be the people who become your following, or that's how to the level that you can know people through Twitter. Um, and I just started being vocal. I started being honest. You know, I stopped kind of thinking so much about what I was saying. And I think that's a big part of my presence on Twitter and what makes people gravitate to me. I'm kind of just, I'm more off the cuff than I think people are used to seeing in book Twitter. Uh, but I also think about like the image of myself that I present, and I try to present things that are interesting and things that are intriguing and things that will make people react, you know, which doesn't mean like I say things that are fake. It's just that I filter, you know, if I eat like a turkey sandwich and I love it, my instinct might be to go on Twitter and say, oh, I just had a turkey sandwich. I love it, but no one's going to care about that, you know? So I try to say the things that matter. And it doesn't have to be like something that matters in a serious way. It can be like a joke, you know, because I joke a lot on Twitter, and I'll have a thought and I think it's funny, or I'll have an experience that's funny and I'll just share it. So definitely, I think that engagement with the community is important, and being who you are, but being like the best version of yourself is important.
Okay. I got you. Yeah, for me, Twitter is just, I don't know. It's like sometimes I'll get a nice engagement with some things. It's just so hard. I mean, I guess for me, because I come from, being in forums and stuff, and that's a very closed community. And if you ever say anything, it all stays on the forum.
Mm-hmm.
It's never going to spiral out of control if you say anything wrong or that kind of, you know, rubs people the wrong way. So I think that might be maybe my issue, maybe some other people's issue, but I hear what you're saying, and I think we could all take some advice from that. I know I will. But you do have one viral tweet that I want to read out here so that we can talk about this. Um, so you recently tweeted out, quote, is hashtag misandry in publishing another word for when you can't write, but society has conditioned you to believe you're entitled to admiration. So you make up a system of oppression to disguise your devastating mediocrity. So, book Twitter was already in a bit of a frenzy over this, and then you gave us this gem. So, let's talk about it. Can you explain the discussion that took place and what caused you to write this?
I actually can't explain it because I didn't know. Like that tweet was a genuine question. Like I didn't know what was going on because there's like so many things happen on book Twitter, and I don't really follow them anymore. But you see these things that people are talking about, and I noticed with that one, like people who aren't usually vocal about drama and things like that were contributing. So I was like, okay, this is like a thing. What is this? And I looked up, like I tracked down the guy who had created it, and I saw his picture, and immediately I was just like, oh my god, like he's just some white guy who like is bitter about something. And he didn't, like, his threads weren't even threaded, like they were just like singular tweets. And then I saw something about like how apparently a female agent had said that like men are not good at writing female characters, and he just went on a tirade, and I was just like, okay, so I was posing the question to Twitter, like, is this a case of just like a white guy being mad that he's not like being praised, or is it something that I should take seriously? And I did not expect it to go that far, but I guess I got my answer. I guess the answer was yes, it is just a white guy being mad about nothing.
It's funny. It's like always the ones that you don't expect that just tend to just.
Yeah. Like, yeah, I had a tweet that went like super viral last week about this experience I had on an airplane, and it was just like some stupid tweet, and
Right.
it's like
I remember that one.
177K likes. And I was just like, okay, but
All right. So it's obvious that you are no stranger to talking about tough topics. You've written a few articles in places like Nerdy POC, Atlanta Black Star, and Everyday Feminism. Now, one of the articles you've written for Huffington Post, titled "YA Twitter's Diversity War is Hurting Writers of Color," brought up some interesting points. So I'm just going to read a couple of your quotes here, and then we're going to talk about this. All right. So first quote is, "The debate over diversity in YA thrives on the false binary that you either don't care about people of color or you're a champion of diversity. It's a two-party political system with liberals on both sides, and it's complete and utter bullshit." Okay, second quote is, "Protecting your career is more important than sharing your opinion. All Black people know this. We cannot be nuanced because the Twitter fights chain us to opposite sides of an imaginary battlefield, with white supremacists on one side and freedom fighters on the other." So, my question to you is, can you explain your viewpoint on call out culture, and what is your overall message in this piece?
Yeah, so I'm gonna I'm gonna tread lightly here. The reason that I wrote the piece was because I noticed like this extreme lack of communication, like productive communication on Twitter, specifically regarding diversity and inclusion, uh, specifically between like the industry people and the community people. So I feel like, or it was my feeling that people in the industry, like writers specifically, were saying a bunch of things and talking about like they would find like a problematic book or a problematic author, and they would like go on these like essentially they would read a book like an arc that only industry people have access to, or like other people have access to arcs, but it was mostly writers, and they would write these reviews about the book, and then it became like this kind of like viral backlash against these books that hadn't come out yet, and this is like a thing that still happens, which is it's fine like that. I have no problem with that. The problem that I had was it became very threatening to people who maybe had a difference of opinion about a particular book, or maybe they wanted to read it. That that then became, oh, you're problematic, oh, you're a problem, you support racism. And I just saw that it was getting very narrow the way that people of color were allowed to sort of exist and engage and express themselves, because everybody was kind of scared, like, oh, if I say this, I'm a problem. And people were so quick to like cancel people and to like bash people. And it just, like, I wrote the article because I was waiting for someone to say, hey, like, this is narrowing the way that we are allowed to exist, and we're not a monolith, you know. We shouldn't have to all say the same things or all feel the same way about certain books or certain people to qualify our right to exist in this community. Otherwise, we get kicked out. You know, this is not fair. It's not right. We need to talk about, why someone might have a different take on a text than someone else. And it just like it just kept bothering me more and more to see when people were like, this is what people of color are saying. This is what people of color are saying. And this is what white people are saying. And that's so unrealistic to me because like people of color are never saying the same things. Not even black people are ever saying the same things, right? There are so many little divisions, like the further you go down. So I just wanted to get closer to the truth. I wanted to get closer to discussing things for what they really are. I felt like there was a front about the way that we were talking about people of color, and I feel like it was making people in the community really scared to be themselves. It's like you were saying, like, you get scared about writing things on Twitter because like somebody's gonna like take it and like destroy you. So I feel like that's not conducive to conversation. It's not conducive to progress when you're like afraid to say anything or ask any question because you're gonna get obliterated. So that's why I wrote that article.
Okay, yeah, I can understand that. Because I feel like one of the points you were making just then was, the arcs, and for people who don't know this, like advanced review copies of the book, um, they only go out to a few people, and then those people will have an opinion, and it's a very, it could be a very strong opinion, but not everybody has read the book, and so you get a lot of people that are kind of like piling in. Would you say that that's accurate as well? That they may not even know everything involved, but they're still kind of having an opinion, and it becomes this big thing.
Yeah. A lot of the backlash was coming from just like tidbits, reviews or like screenshots that people had seen. And I also was like thinking about my own work, and I wrote this like extremely difficult issue horror book, which like has a lot of passages that are kind of uncomfortable. And you really only understand those passages in context. So I would hate if someone like said, "Oh, this book is so problematic," and took like a sentence and just like put it out there and said, "Oh, hey, look, this is a problem." It might be like a character who's like the worst guy in the book saying this. And I don't think it's fair to say like, oh, an author is problematic just because there's passages. And I'm not like particularly defending any of the authors because I'm not in a position to defend them because I haven't read the book. But I also feel that I'm not in a position to tear them down because I haven't read the book. I take this position of like, I don't know, and I'm not gonna. I like making my own choice. I don't like sort of jumping on a bandwagon.
Right, right. Okay. Well, I understand that. And let me see. You also wrote a very strong article, in my opinion, last year titled "How Publishing is Failing LGBT Kids of Color." And in it, you pose the question of why we hardly have any gay Black characters in literature, and you answer it with it's that no one values the Black gay American enough to read about him. And until we have stories about him, people will continue not to value him. So, how has your experience shaped you to want to write characters like this?
Um, I I went through self discovery while I was writing the novels that took me nowhere. Which is like I started querying my first book when I was 12, and then I got my agent when I was 22. So that was like 10-year process, and I I I I had to get like closer to representing who I was and what I cared about in my book, but it took like unlearning a lot of internalized stigma about myself, and it took like coming out, and it took like understanding my blackness and being comfortable with my blackness to be able to put that on a page to where it was like so authentic that it would resonate, because I feel like, those are the stories that resonate, the authentic ones, when you're writing something that only you can write, because it shows through when you're really writing the book of your heart. So really just like becoming comfortable with who I was a big factor in becoming comfortable with the kind of stories that I was meant to write.
All right. All right. Very cool. So you kind of had like a little bit of a growth process over the span of writing this book that kind of got you to this point, which is pretty interesting story there. And this article goes into detail about this book, Jake in the Box. So what can you tell us about it? What is it about?
So it's about a black kid, 16-year-old black kid at a conservative prep school, and he's one of the only black students at the school, and he sees the dead. He's like a medium, uh, which is initially it's something that he's lived with his entire life. It's something that he's learned to sort of tune out, but he comes across this really powerful ghost and finds out that it's the ghost of a school shooter who died like years ago and now is back to find a vessel to possess to get a second chance at life. But this kid is like, he's a school shooter, he's violent, he's like really messed up. So, what the book is basically the way that this ghost goes about unraveling Jake's psyche and sort of like taking down. Now, there's a lot of toys are a big metaphor in this book. Just toys that kind of, the book is called Jake in the Box, so that's like a metaphor for like the winding of him. And then there's like a Jenga metaphor, which I like, about the way that like the ghost sort of takes these blocks out of his life. So he targets his love life, he targets his home life, he targets his school life, and he's trying to do is he's trying to make Jake's body so weak that he's able to enter. And Jake's resistance against that is owning who he is. It's owning his body. It's being comfortable with himself. He's a very insecure kid at the beginning, and it's really like a coming of age story about this kid who learns to be comfortable in who he is enough to make it so that nobody has control over who he is and nobody has control over his life. And it's about the fundamental differences between this kid who is predatory and who kind of like needs somebody else, and Jake, who comes to falling back on himself and being proud of who he is.
Okay, sounds very interesting. I love that the idea of this ghost kind of trying to break down his defenses. I think that's a pretty interesting concept. Now, so what makes Jake in the Box different from other YA novels with an LGBT protagonist?
Well, Jake is black, which is like a huge difference because we don't have any. We don't have any queer black characters in YA who are like leading the narrative. Um, so that's a big difference. Looking at the intersectional, looking at that story from an intersectional lens, I think that's different. It's it's a tough one. It's not a story that looks that like is particularly uplifting about LGBT themes, but I think that it looks at issues that we deal with. And it's important to look at.
All right, interesting. So, how will racial identity and sexual identity intertwine in this story? If you can let us know any about that.
So yeah, so Jake goes through a big part of the novel not realizing his sexuality. He comes to, by the end of the novel, he comes to this like sexual fluidity, like he likes everybody, he likes everyone. But for a big portion of the novel, he doesn't realize that, and he's got it so repressed because like so much of his life is dealing with the racism at his school and like dealing with being black in this white space. And the shooter, like some of it is narrated from the shooter, and he's gay, and so it's like journal entries. Like some of it is not all of it, but some of it is his journal entries from like 6 years ago, and it's about like how he never really came to terms with his sexuality or like never really got his family to accept that. So it's you get like these sort of parallel storylines. It's not really the narrative is kind of not necessarily linear the whole way through. So you get with Sawyer, who's the shooter, you get like a lot of this big gay story about like family and how they and just like how they don't really get it. And then with Jake, you get like this story about blackness. And then at a certain point, those two things dovetail when you realize that Jake is both, and Jake is going through both, even though the focus has been on this white gay person and Jake's has been black. You realize like, okay, whoa, the main character is dealing with both worlds, and then it goes into like what that means and what that means for his family, what it means for the black community, what it means for the gay community, and just like how he has really no place to belong, and his only when he's 16, he's in this environment where he doesn't have other black gay people around him. Uh, his only defense is to be comfortable with who he is to the point where those things are just parts of him. You know, his gayness, his blackness, those things are just parts of him. And he also, you know, wants to be a cartoonist, and he also loves his mom, and he he made it. He has a new best friend, and like all these things that are who he is. And it just kind of it transcends those labels essentially.
Gotcha. Okay, very interesting. I'm very much intrigued, and yeah, I'm looking forward to 2020 when that comes out, because I will definitely get my copy. But so let me ask you, how did you get the publishing deal?
So I got my agent through cold querying. I got my agent like back in May of last year, and we did like I think we did one or two revisions, and then we went out on sub. And I was on submission for about actually I was on submission for a few months, and then when I wrote that article that we were talking about, the YA Twitter article, like 5 different editors contacted my agent and said like we love his writing, like send us his work. And one of the editors who did that was the editor that I ended up signing with. So we sent it to her in November, like around the time that the article came out. She read it in 2 weeks, and she was like, "I love it so much, but it still needs work." And she offered an exclusive R&R, which is a revise and resubmit. So I got on the phone with her, and then we talked about directions that it could go. And she said, you know, you can do this, you can take this, or you can like stay, you know, on sub or whatever. So I did an exclusive revision for her because I really liked what she had to say about the story and where she wanted to take it. And it took her like a while to read it. I was waiting for a few months, and then she offered. So that was
So what was
great.
that moment like? Because this is one of the big five that we're talking about. This isn't, you know, this is a big deal. So what did that feel like for you?
It felt like everything meant something, you know, all of that because nobody really sees or talks about what like the iceberg underneath the water, right? All you see is like the deal. All you see is the announcement, but you don't see, you know, the 3 books that I wrote before this that went nowhere, and like the all nighters, and just like throwing my studies to the wayside to write this work that I believed in. So it just felt really meaningful, to just like have proof that I had been working so hard.
All right, I got you. So yeah, I'm happy for you. Congratulations on that, and I'm looking forward to the release. You said it was spring 2020 is what it's set to release. So
Mhm.
um, let me ask you before we get to exactly like the dates or whatever. Like, what do you want readers to get from reading this book?
Um, that's such a big question because I want everyone to get from it what they get from it. I really it deals with a lot. It deals with race and sexuality, but it also deals with like gun violence and predatory cycles and abuse of various forms and fathers and mothers and family and there's so much that I think that people can get from it. But I want people to realize that we can be the hero of the story. I think that in like a cultural context, I think that's a very important thing about this book. That we can be the heroes. You can root for us. You don't have to toss out blackness or gayness to have a character. You can have both. Um, so I think that's a really big thing. But in terms of like the message, it's a book about how people who are hurt other people. That's what it means for me, like in a major way. But there are so many different things. So I just want people to get whatever they get from it.
Okay, I got that. So when you get a more firm date, will you let me know so I can put it in this YouTube thing, and so I can get people to like click on it and maybe pre-order or do whatever they need to do. Because my thing is like when we do stuff like this, we have authors out here that are trying to change the world and change how we view different characters and different types of people. So I feel like the least we can do is just buy the book. So that I would like to do that. And so would you be able to provide me with that so that I can do that for you?
Absolutely. When I know more, I'll tell you.
Okay. Sounds good. Sounds good. All right. So everyone, you heard it here. When I get that information, I'm going to put that below the video. And I'm also going to put the articles that we talked about below the video as well. Ryan, I almost called you Jake, but Ryan, uh, thank you so much for joining me for the interview tonight. I really appreciate it. I hope you had a good time. So thanks.
I did. Thank you for inviting me. I enjoyed this.
No problem. All right. You have a good night. And everyone, thanks for watching. I will be back hopefully next month with a new guest. And you can always check out my other videos. And I'm always putting up some weird stuff. So, I'm always entertaining you, hopefully. So you guys all have a good night.
All right. Bye.